Frameworks are good. Frameworks are also bad. Today we're checking out a video of the Primogen reacting to an article about being a frameworker and not being an engineer. And the specific part of the video spurred a couple of thoughts, and I thought, why not we jump on together and I'll air them out to you guys.
But from a career perspective, the framework worker has a bleak outlook. Coders with the same set of transferable skills using a framework are being churned out en masse by about 50 new online academies every day. Yeah, see, I do think this is a fundamental problem, which is that there is a ton. Okay, so the unproblem is that coding is accessible to anybody. The problem is that we hate gatekeeping. And maybe just a bit more gatekeeping is good. Like, hey, here's some things you really should know. Here's some things you should really try to pursue. Maybe it's not gatekeeping. Maybe it's some other thing, some way to help people understand that, like, what they've learned is not the end. It is the most initial seedling of what you need to do. Stop.
It's guidance, right? A framework for a more experienced developer is going to allow you to reuse code more easily, to follow a pattern that is already predefined and well used, well tested, and it's also going to allow you to continue in a direction and prototype quickly. Loads of benefits to using a framework. But if you're a brand new developer and you are starting off learning a framework, more so than you are the core language that the framework is built in, you become what's known as a frameworker. And there are many, many reasons that this is bad. And as Brian, I think, is about to go on to say, the start of your journey. This is a way to maybe, again, like an experienced developer, learn some new paradigms, some new framework patterns, some new structural patterns, ways of laying out code. But it really is the beginning of your journey.
Stop looking at learning as a 6-month, 1 year, 2 year, 4 year exercise.
I've been writing code professionally 13 years now, 14 years now, and I still learn stuff every day. It's like people that do these intensive driving courses. They think that just because they pass the examination that they're, kind of qualified and on an equal footing to somebody that maybe spent 6 months learning to drive and failed the test twice. You're going to have fundamental gaps. You may have enough to pass the exam, but you're not going to have the experience, the things that you did wrong, the things that you did right. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit from my own experience.
But as a 20-year, 30-year exercise. And if a frameworker eventually lands a dream job where they get to do more interesting projects, they might experience a rude awakening when their knowledge gaps become evident. Yep. Side note, they might just be made a manager, in which case they'll probably do incredibly well. Got him. So what if a frameworker wants to be an engineer? I'd suggest they start becoming programmers. Okay, so this is where this distinction, I don't really care. But anyways, I'm going to use the term programmer with the sense that is somewhat idiosyncratic to this article's premise. A programmer is someone who lives in code. And by that vague expression, I mean two things. Programmer is reading lots of code. A programmer is writing lots of different sorts of code. Let's take a look at those in turn. And heads up, I'm going to switch back to the second person here because I believe you deserve that sort of personal touch. Okay. You'll definitely, the programmer is reading lots of code. You'll definitely hear it.
And this is one way that you can learn via a framework, right? Like the framework, as I said previously, is going to provide you a very tried and tested way of building code, of prototyping, of getting something out the door quickly. It's all CRUD at the end of the day. Being able to get from point A to point B. Websites, yeah, they have some complex integrations sometimes, but if you're doing website development, or you're using, which most of us are these days, you want a quick way to get from point A to point B. Dig into the framework, read the code that's written by people that are more experienced than you, and start to understand the code. It's like reading a book.
Said that reading code.
If you can't be a good writer without reading lots. That's how, if you follow any sort of writers, any people that make books, then they'll probably tell you first off that they read a lot more than they write.
Is one of the best ways to learn to write good code. I think this is really good. It's my favorite personal way is not just to read code, but to first build something and then read how someone else does it. Because it's like you get this one chance to be deeply familiar with a topic, and see a completely different way you could have thought about it all at the same time, which is really hard to do in almost anything else. But in
And that's a big part of programming generally, right? There are so many ways to skin a cat. There's so many ways to do the same thing. And it's all about perspective. I think the sooner we take our ego out of the conversation and we allow for different perspectives to influence our behaviors, our decision making, the more ammunition we've got, the more, the more opportunity we have to do something differently.
code, it is something you get to do. So solve advent of code day one in a language you're not that familiar with, and then look at someone else's advent of code day one solution. You'll go, wow, what is that? Geez, I didn't even know about that.
And this is another good thing that can come out of frameworks. It's, frameworks, like I say, that they are great for lots of things, but they can also lull you into this false sense of security that you know what you're talking about. From my personal experience, when I first got into web development, I was doing some ASP.NET back in the day, and then I moved on to PHP. And with PHP, a lot of the sites at the time were either being built in WordPress or being built in Drupal. I went down the Drupal route. This put me in a position where I was adhering to a framework pretty tightly. There was the Drupal way, there was lots of Drupalisms, and that put me down a good career path. But from, learning core PHP, there were lots of pitfalls, and there were lots of, things that maybe I might not do within that framework that I had to learn outside of that framework to make me a, more rounded PHP developer. But if you want to then transfer those skills, transfer those understandings to another framework, you can use that as an opportunity to learn different patterns, different ways of doing things. So if you're familiar with a framework and maybe the patterns or the design patterns that framework is built upon, you can take that across and port it over and say, oh, like recently, or, a while ago, a year ago or so, I wanted to learn Laravel. So I took what I knew and I used the framework to put me in a better position to learn how Laravel might go about doing things.
Whoa, that's super cool. Then you'll do it again, and now you have all this newfound tools, and then the second time you do it, you'll see a whole new set of ways you can do things, or just different ways to approach with the tools you already know about. It's beautiful. It's so good. It is so dang good. You'll learn to cover edge cases and handle exceptions like a professional, but there's even better reason to read lots of code. The best reason to read code is just become really good at reading code. The ability to efficiently read and understand new code is probably the most important single skill that an engineer will have, and the programmer is becoming an engineer because the technologies, languages, and libraries that make up core stack are constantly changing. Plus, reading your own code from 6 months ago is the same exercise.
This is it, and this is one of the big parts of my workflow. Once you graduate from, an academy or a university or college or whatever it is, and you end up in the working world, your code will be reviewed by, potentially lots of people. One of the big parts of my workflow that I do religiously is actually to review my own code. So to approach it like it is somebody else's and look at what you've done in a try and do that in the most objective sense you can. As Prime's saying, you can go back and look at your own code and you'll probably think somebody else wrote it.
Okay? Even if you work by yourself, reading the dumb you wrote like 3 months ago is equal to reading someone else's bad code, right?
Oh, yeah.
But there's no substitute for being able to understand code by reading it yourself, and that's especially true when moving into a new job somewhere. Luckily, there's a ton of code out there to be read, and it can be encountered while doing the second thing. Programmers writing lots of different source code. Oh, I have that problem too. Anyone who thinks I don't write bad code and look back on my own code and go, why did I write that? You're a fool. Everyone does it.
Everyone does it.
Every now and then I do look back and go, that's good code.
Yeah.
One of the ways to break...
There are a few things that I've been particularly proud of where I've gone back and thought, this is solid, but less so than most, for sure.
Free from the framework or rut is to write code that's not typically for you. That doesn't necessarily mean that you are writing a different sort of app. If you're doing machine learning in Python, you could have a side project implementing ML algorithms yourself. Boom. Bonus points if you do it in C, C++. But of course, it might mean that you're writing a different sort of app. Trying to write a desktop GUI on top of some of the scripts you run every day, just for fun. You make web front ends. Try a text-based role-playing game. This is great advice. This is great advice because this is so dang good, right? This is exactly it.
Find something that you enjoy, something that you want to be passionate about, something that you can really get into, something that you think that solves a problem. That's really cool. And use that as an opportunity to don't just write your to-do list app, your recipe app, whatever. Find something you actually care about and try and work out, either based on research, based on things that you've learned from studying the framework, how to implement this idea in a way that is agnostic maybe of a framework. So if you're doing PHP and you work with Laravel or WordPress or Drupal, try and build something that's agnostic, something that could be used by any framework, like a library or an integration or an SDK of some sort.
Try something different. Expose yourself. Not in the
One of the reasons I like watching Prime's videos is because he makes me feel just a little bit stupid, and you should never be the smartest person in the room. Expose yourself to new things, to new ideas, new paradigms. That's how you learn. The failure is where you learn.
illegal way, but in the legal way, the way that everyone enjoys. Okay, not that other way. Yard users. The thing to be mindful of is that you don't simply want to switch from one framework to another. You're trying to learn. You want to be using your programming language at a lower level than you're used to, and then creating your own layers of abstraction on top of that.
But you can. But you can learn how to use another framework. It depends how quickly you learn. It depends how quickly you understand the code. So if you're reading the code that's within your framework, if you dig deeper into how that is achieving this kind of boilerplate or this kind of framework, this abstraction almost, depends how deeply and how much you understand it. Obviously you can research into the design patterns or the core abstractions that they've used on top of the language to help you better understand it. But there are ways to step that, because not everybody is going to jump straight into the core of Drupal, for example, and be like, hey, this all makes sense. So it's finding a way to kind of work best to what you know and how best you learn, and then look at implementing some of those things yourself. Like MVC is a structural pattern that's used by a lot of PHP frameworks. Study that, understand it, and then do some implementation of your own MVC, for example.
This is a great, because even just creating your own abstractions and seeing how far you can take it is an exercise onto itself, right? You should be learning about things like I/O and sockets and event loops and buffers and hash generation and tail recursion. Last one seems a little strange because that's like one. Oh, okay. And as you add layers of abstraction, you should be learning about things like polymorphism and inheritance and interfaces and state machines and design patterns. And you should be gaining a vocabulary and then immediately never doing inheritance again, except for that one problem we all know, which is really, really valuable, which is event emitters. And then somehow that just makes way more sense. And everyone seems to like that one. But I guess you could also provide a property, but then you have this whole public property problem. And then every object has to have the same. Doesn't really matter. Anyways, so when do I become an engineer? The limitations of being a programmer. As a programmer, you'll find that that you can do things with code that would have been impossible for you as a frameworker, but it's possible to do some remarkable things and still be a poor engineer.
Absolutely.
If you think you're a good engineer, you're kidding yourself, okay? I don't know about this. This article might derail for me on that one part, which is I think everyone should look at yourself as being a bad programmer, because you'll always just take an extra step of care. Imagine that you're building your own car from parts, but as you assemble your car, every time you need to attach an unmoving part or another, instead of using nuts and bolts, you weld them together. You could potentially build a car that works really well at first, but imagine something and it breaks, and it's the sort of thing that that's hard to get to. You really need to remove some other parts in order to get to it. This is probably a better apt description. Honestly, this is an apt description of programming. It's more like welding than anything else. Like when you have to undo something that's under a couple stuff, like a couple layers.
And I see this quite heavily when new people come to a framework that haven't really been maybe as exposed to the proper way to do something within a framework. So you see things that are really welded together that could be achieved in a way that's maybe more appropriate to that framework. And that's a whole nother story about doing frameworks badly. But it's understanding why and how that framework works and what those abstractions are to lead you in a better place to understand how to not weld everything together, to be able to build building blocks or car parts that can actually fit together in a meaningful way.
Like you just absolutely have to take apart your program. The amount of
refactoring.
I actually like this. I actually like this a lot. I might start using that. All the welding was a bad choice. It may be the choice you have to do, though, for programming. Imagine that you want to upgrade one of the parts of your car. It would basically be really nice if that one part could be popped off and a new one popped on. I'm not saying that being a programmer in this sense means that you've completely ignored good engineering principles, but the goals of this programming phase are different from those of engineering phase. If programming has been more or less linear journey of gaining capability in certain skills, becoming an engineer will be hard right angle. Okay? To switch metaphors, you could think of it like language development. As a programmer, you're gaining native speaking fluency with the language that you work in. As an engineer, you'll start writing academic prose. Okay, at this point, this is where I think we fully disagree, potentially. I let the man cook.
He's lost me.
But I'm feeling like I disagree. So what is the mysterious shift in priorities that defines the engineer? The engineer plans.
I don't think we need to go too much further into this. I think the core takeaway from the points that I see here is that frameworks frameworks are dangerous for new developers, for new engineers, for new whatever you want to call yourself, because they give you a false sense of security. They put you into a position where you think you know what you're doing because you've made Hello World work, but you don't know what you're doing. And that's bad, because you won't be able to do the things that you need to do in your career. But that's not it. It doesn't mean frameworks are bad. That means that you're not being lazy, but you're not using the framework to its full potential. And when I say using it, doesn't mean that to achieve building the application, but using everything that's available. So researching the code, looking into it, finding out how you can, what you can learn from the implementation of that framework, and then how you might go about doing similar things in the core language itself. And then if you wanted to shift frameworks, for example, you might learn about new paradigms, new concepts. So you can use different frameworks from the one that maybe you did a boot camp in React, but you want to learn Angular. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but then you might learn some different patterns, some different paradigms. And that's another great way to utilize frameworks and not let them make you more stupid. But don't get comfortable. Don't get lazy. Make sure you're learning all the intricacies of the core language that you're using yourself. Have a go, fail, do it wrong, do some research, try again, fail again, and keep learning, because that's the only way you're going to get better. And I speak from experience. So let me know what your experiences are and whether you started with a core language or with a framework. These days, I think everybody probably started with a framework, but I'd really be interested to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you made it this far, I don't really like asking, but subscribe and like the video, and I'll see you in another one. Peace.